Dear friends, we are back. It's 3:30 and we will have our next panel on discrimination. And I'm very happy that this panel consists just of women. I think that's a good signal, especially also due to the fact that sometimes women are discriminated. We have had also decisions on that topic, and so I'm happy that we could convince so many interesting women to be part of the panel. And I'm also happy that Susan Boos, the new president of the Swiss Press Council, was ready to moderate the panel. I'm very happy and I'm very grateful, and we wish you a warm welcome, and we are happy that we can cooperate with you in the upcoming years. So Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon all together. I'm a bit nervous. I have never done it before, but it's a very interesting meeting already. So I'm very happy, and it's a great pleasure for me to moderate this panel, Discrimination of Different Social Groups in the Media. And I'm also very happy that I have such a competent guest on the panel. I would like to welcome Muriel Hanot. Where is she? Ah, hi. And Katharine Sarikakis. Hi. And Amra Durić. Thanks a lot that you take part in this panel. And first, some few words of the process of the panel. So in the beginning, every panelist has 10 minutes just for a short input. Afterwards, we have a discussion amongst the panelists, and the last 20 or 30 minutes will be open for questions for the audience. Now I would like to make a short introduction of my guests. First to Muriel Hanot. Probably you know her already very well. She's the General Secretary of the Belgian Press Council since 5 years, if I got it right. Yeah, more or less. And yeah, she has a degree in history and social communication and a PhD in communication. And then Katharine Sarikakis. She's a professor at the University in Vienna, professor for communication science, and she leads also the media governance and industry research lab. And she is also the founding and twice elected chair of the Communication Law and Policy section of the European Communication Research and Education Association. So welcome. And last but not least, Amra Durić. She is a young journalist from Vienna. She worked there since 2014, writing about social political issues, sometimes also in the culture section. And in July, she has become part of the chief editor's team. Amra Durić, I would like to start with you. The title of the panel, Discrimination of Different Social Groups in the Media, has also a personal connection to you. In preparation of the panel, you wrote to me in an email, I'm born in Bosnia and came to Austria as a refugee. I would like to talk about the challenges that journalists with foreign backgrounds sometimes face in the media landscapes, but also why it is so important to have more journalists with different backgrounds in newsrooms. So, Amra Durić, the floor is yours.
Hello, do you hear me? Can you hear me good? Yes. Hello, thank you very much for the invitation. As stated, my name is Amra Durić and I work for the daily newspaper Heute in Vienna. I would like to tell you a little bit about myself first. I was born in Bosnia and came as a refugee to Austria with my mother. I grew up in Tyrol, and 10 years ago I moved to Vienna to study journalism. I worked for different media outlets in Vienna and started to work full-time for heute in 2014. As a migrant and a woman, I have noticed a few changes in the media landscape. Over the last few years, I think a lot about how the media reports on migrants, on crime, on social issues has changed. For example, when we think back to the awful terror attack in Vienna, most outlets tried to be very sensitive as possible. We, for example, at heute, we chose not to show videos or pictures of victims or the terrorists. And another example that is very close to my heart are reports on crime and violence, especially against women and migrants. I think what changed in the last few years is how we report, not all outlets, but most outlets in Austria, about victims, especially women. I think the reason for that is in our case too at heute, and this is what I also do, is to make sure to talk to support organizations, counseling centers in regards of the stories that I'm doing, especially when reporting on violence against women and femicide. Also, we try to avoid words like shock horror or relationship drama instead of femicide or attempted murder. I also think that that has changed, and that is very important how what words we use. I think for me and the stories I write, I always try to cover cases, whether it is about migrants or the violence against women or crime stories. I always try to give the family members or survivors of violence a voice if they want to. So not just talk about what happened, where, when, but also try to include the people that it happened to and give them a voice, because I try not always to write about the people or their stories, but to give them a voice so they can voice their opinions and have the narrative. No, I will circle back. That yeah, that they can also have a voice in the whole reporting. So the stories that I write about often involve topics like migration, hate speech, violence, and yeah, and so to go to the journalists with different backgrounds, as you mentioned, I think it is very, very important to have diversity in a newsroom. Journalists with different backgrounds have different points of views and different approaches to stories, which is a benefit for the reader and a benefit for the news outlet, because the readers can find themselves in the news outlet. Growing up, I would have loved to see more women, more migrants in Austrian newsrooms. To work as a journalist was something that was almost impossible to achieve for me. And I had the feeling if I wanted to have a career or a success in Austria as a journalist, or whether it was back in school already, I always had the feeling that I have to repress my background because it would just look better, I would fit in better. I always thought it was a weak spot to have a different background. And still today, as a woman and a migrant, I still get emails and messages from strangers that I should go back to my country, or that I don't belong here, or especially when I write about topics that concern migrants or that concern women or violence against women. During my time at heute, but I wanted to say it's a small group, thankfully. I heard from colleagues, they are getting death threats. They are not getting jobs because people often tell them they have an accent, or that thankfully never happened to me, but I've been at heute for a long time. And during this time, I started to embrace my background, because 7 years ago, I was, I think, the first one or the second one with a different background. And the newspaper told me that it's a good thing, because you can reach more readers and another group of readers. So today I see it as a strength, and I think we should really have more journalists all over the world. We have like really a lot of journalists now with different backgrounds. We have 50% women in the newsroom. So diversity is really a big topic here at our outlet. But I really would like to see more people with different backgrounds in the newsrooms in Austria, because I think there is a lot to do still. Yeah, so that was a little bit about me. I haven't watched the time, so I don't know if it was too fast or too little information.
No,
this is my first time doing this too, so I'm a little bit nervous also. But yeah, these are the topics that I just wanted to cover briefly now for the beginning.
Thank you very much, Amra Durić. You give us some very interesting points, and I think it's a good time to go now to Katharine Sarikakis. Just a few words about you. When you wrote me also in some email, and that sounded very interesting to me. I would like to speak in a few minutes about two issues: hate speech, and here's the connection what you said before, Amra Durić, hate speech against women journalists and the impact on media content and reporting crime and migrants. Although these two elements seem separate, I want to argue that they are not.
Yes, thank you for the introduction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Of course, I was overambitious, what I can do in 10 minutes. And also you are all overambitious of trying to put an academic to speak only for 10 minutes. But let me try. So first of all, many thanks to the Presserat in Austria and all the Presserette, all the media councils that you are here and you are allowing me to address you with these issues. It's very interesting that Amra started from her background, which is so important. We tell journalists, well, some of us tell journalists, when you write a story, you have to connect to your own background and don't pretend you stand somewhere in a void, yeah, in a vacuum. You have to connect with the people you're writing about, and also to understand that you are an advocate for democracy. And we try to do the same in academia, not very successfully, I have to say. Nevertheless, academics and journalists have very, very many common things together. What we seem to separate on is that journalists go with headlines, social scientists go with more complicated stories. And here's the complication. I wanted to just throw into the discussion the understanding that these social groups that the media discriminate against voluntarily or involuntarily derive from the fact that these groups are considered outsiders. They're considered others than the norm. And this is very important to understand. It's a very old story, but it's very important to understand that this story persists, and this story is ingrained in the DNA of journalism, also in the DNA of regulators. And I would include you at this point, i.e. us also as academia. I too am a migrant, if you want to say, although by choice. Still, this makes me, I don't know, a luxus migrant, I suppose, I don't know. I have been a migrant twice. I changed countries twice in my career, and I had to also adjust. I have accent in all languages I speak. This is my third language. And I totally understand what it means to always stand out, not in ways that you have chosen. So women and migrants, in the past few years, refugees in particular, but also generally migrants. And I want to make a parenthesis here. It's very interesting that the German-speaking area refers to migrants as people with Migrationshintergrund, migrant background. This does not exist in the English-speaking world. So it's an interesting about the culture in which we look at people that are different from us, or from the majority, if you like. So these two groups have very many characteristics. On the one hand, it is very difficult nowadays to talk about women in a hateful manner in public established legend, as we call them, legacy media. Of course, we have a lot of that on social media. But on the other hand, what happens is the experiences that Amra has just managed to refer to, which is exactly this background underpinning hate that goes on. And of course, the aim of that hate is to silence women. We have done research here at the university in my group with Austrian journalists, female journalists, and they are telling us they have two strategies. One is to completely withdraw from politics, writing about politics or migration, or, you know, the sensitive guys issues. You know, usually men deal with this important politics in our societies. So either they do that or they become really vocal about it. And here is something that I think we need to take very much into consideration. The women who have the strength and the capacity to be vocal and more visible about these issues are those, usually those who come from institutions and organizations, media organizations, which take care of them. Meaning good working conditions for one, and also a culture that is aware and sensitized. Okay, so I think this is why, for example, press councils and independent regulators have a great deal of potential to do a great deal of good work here and really change the scenery. Another study that we did, the links are already in the chat, is one that looked actually on the reporting of crime and assumption of innocence as a human right in 6 countries, maybe it was 7, I don't remember that anymore. What we found, among other things, was that refugees, foreigners, migrants, and especially Muslims are considered to be outsiders. And when a crime is reported, then all these people are referred to with their so-called citizenship. Therefore, suspects' foreign citizenship comes to the foreground. Of course, this is not the case with Austrian cases of crime. Now, there are several issues there to discuss and to unpack, if you like. I have 2 minutes, I see. And however, I think what is important for us here to understand is that hate speech, as I can see also from the discussion on the chat and previous conversations here, takes it's a fluid way of expression, and but what it has at its core is that it targets the so-called outsiders, the others of each society, and in various societies this other will be somebody else. For sure, women are the constant factor. So female journalists or other women, when we report women, as for example, as violence against women, that is an issue that is constant across cultures. But other than that, the who becomes and is an outsider is very contextual. Therefore, any kind of attempt to look at hate speech in that respect and discrimination, because hate speech as we know by now, is not simply a matter of freedom of expression. It has very real physical and real life consequences. And these physical and real life consequences involve also emotional well-being and health, as well as mental health, and cultures out there that allow people to imagine themselves that they belong, or people who get a very clear message that they do not belong. The largest thing about this, I'm done, the largest impact of that consequence is, of course, democracy. And I'm not talking about democracy as something abstract and because it sounds good and everything, but in very, very concrete terms, because democracy is a work in progress. And once we stop trying for better, we go backwards. And in many ways, in social media and popular media and populist media, we see that, and the responsibility that journalists and editors, chief editors, have is also very important. I will close with a little comment that when we published the toolkit of how to, with proposals how to do better reporting when it comes to the assumption of innocence, I received a very long, angry email from a chief editor of an otherwise critical press here in Austria, telling me off, basically, for telling them how to do their job, and that is not a good thing to write the citizenship of somebody. I mean, where do you start? Maybe we can start from there later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting talk. I think we will come back to different points afterwards. Now, Muriel, I know you wrote me that the Press Council from Belgium has adopted new recommendations sur le traitement journalistique des violences. It's translated probably well on the treatment of gender violence, is correct?
Reporting on gender-based violence, yes, of course. Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So the floor is yours.
So thank you. I will share my screen to structure my intervention, and I hope I'm not will be not too long. I wanted to talk about this recommendation of ours because it has recently been adopted in June 2021, and the idea was to give guidelines, to give a practical tool for journalists on the way to report ethically on gender-based violence. So it's we didn't wake up one day saying, "Oh, it would be a good idea for us to talk about gender-based violence in our recommendation." The fact is that this recommendation is a result of a long process. We have had several discussions about it, and of course, it's the birth, I would say, of this recommendation has been prepared for several stages. I wanted to talk you about. So, as many of you here, I have noticed, and we have noticed, that there was an abundant news coverage of this social problem, particularly the covering of the violence against women. And since 2017, with the Me Too movement and other movement afterwards, we know we have new in France another kind of movement among the so-called League of LOL, and because this is in the news, of course, because it is in the media agenda. The consequence is that we see several complaints coming in the Press Council. So because there is complaints, we have rulings, but it's not because we had rulings, we have made rulings about it, that we decided to make it a principal issue and to have a recommendation about it. It's the beginning, I would say, of the story. 1 year later, in 2018, there has been an academic survey on 120 stories published in 6 French-speaking Belgian newspapers, and this academic survey was focusing on violence against women, and the results were very questioning. They were not especially talking about ethical problems. Most of the time, it was the way journalists are working when dealing with stories about violence against women, and it was about stereotypes, generalization, and so on. But the questions were there. The media has been informed about it, and it has been the things you cannot be blind about it. So this 1 year later, in the same, no, not 1 year later, in just after this result, the release of these results, there has been recommendations on how to cover violence against women, but these recommendations have been edited by the Association of Journalists and Women's Organization together, and these were the commissioner of the survey, and they wanted these recommendations to be addressed to journalists and media. After 1 year later, in the framework of the Istanbul Convention, the media minister of ours decided, she tried to make the media outlets adopt a charter based on these recommendations and more. And it was a larger perspective. And after that, the reaction, you guess, has been that the media had asked us to intervene and to consider the things under the perspective of ethics. And the Association of Journalists has asked us to examine the recommendation, to assess if the elements were ethical or not, and optionally, the association asks us to endorse the recommendation. So we have worked on it, and we have decided to release this recommendation. And after discussion, we have decided that it would be only about ethics. We have also decided to extend it to gender-based violence and not only violence against women. We have recalled in the beginning of the text, and we have repeated alongside the document, that we respect all editorial choices. So we do not want to interfere in the editorial choices. It's obvious, of course, coming from a press council, you know that, but it was better to say it to avoid the instrumentalization of the recommendation. And then we have decided also, to be clear about it, it's not about new standards, it's not about new principles, it's only about the basic standards figuring in our code, and about principles that have been identified in all the relevant cases I have talked about. These principles, I would not describe all the recommendation. I will put it. I will put an hyperlink in the chat afterwards. I just wanted to point and to stress 4 main elements, 4 main standards and principles we have put in this recommendation, and those were the crucial mistakes that we have noticed in the cases we have dealt. So the first one is social responsibility. So it's a general approach asking the journalists to examine the predictable impacts. I insist, it's predictable impacts. So the impacts of the story is writing or preparing on the society, on the person he or she is identifying, on the sources, and on the public. You have to take care of what you will release as a story, because it can have a great impact on the person, on the society, on the public, on the sources, when you are dealing with sensitive topics. And this is the case when you are dealing with gender-related reports. Second, and it's a very important point, not only in this topic, but in other too, but it is particularly here, the identification of victims. So we recall the journalists, please avoid mentioning converging details that allow the public to identify the person and specifically the victim that you are talking about. And these details can be text, image, sound. So when they converging, they can lead the public to identify. So be careful about it. Another point is the caution, prudence when you are reporting on stories where the parties involved are giving different versions. So you don't know which version is the right one. So you have to take care. And when reporting these versions, you have to avoid victimizing of a second time of the victim, and you have to avoid presenting without evidence a person as guilty before the judgment. And it's not the presumption of innocence, it's like the presumption of innocence, but we in our jurisprudence we have said that presumption of innocence is not of our competence. We are not a legal court. We are only a press council, so we are talking of presenting without evidence a person as guilty before the judgment. It's about respect of truth. It's about in general. So I won't enter the details because I will be so long. And the last point is the wording. So it's obvious that we have to use words that are adequate to the topic, to the story, and so it's adequate terminology and the avoiding of use of inappropriate terms, because it's a sensitive topic, and you can mislead the public when using the wrong term. So these are the most important principles of the recommendation. It's targets, and it's very important for us, it targets all the journalists. I mean all the journalists in functional meaning, so everyone who has function, an activity as journalists. It's not a professional definition, it's a functional definition. We are targeting also every media doing a work of information, which means that the media can be member of the press council or not. And it's all media and journalists in our jurisdiction, which means that we are targeting we are targeting media that are established in the French-speaking and German-speaking parts of Belgium, and if these media are not established but are producing contents, releasing content, publishing contents on this to the public of this territory, we are also competent to deal the complaints about it. So you can find the recommendation in French. I'm sorry about it, but yes, as everybody is saying in the chat, you can use Google tool for the moment to understand what we are talking about. You can find it Yeah, and I will put the link, the hyperlink in the chat room, so you can see it in the appropriate way. So I'm done. Thank you, Suzanne. I give you the floor back.
Thank you very much, Muriel. That's very interesting, and I'm sure we will talk about it in the Swiss Press Council too. But before, I would like to open the discussion among my guests. So, Amra Durić, do you have a question, for example, to Katharine Sarikakis or to Muriel?
Yes, sorry. My question is in general, women in journalism and hate speech, Katharine, what you mentioned earlier. How do you think, what is the best, because I'm talking from my own experience. I have, in the last couple of months, I have been very outspoken also in social media, sharing my articles about topics like migration or violence against women. And the more you share, the louder you are. There is more hate speech coming towards me. And you mentioned it before, it does something with your mental health and also emotionally. I was thinking about maybe pulling back and not covering too political topics because it's just too hard. You have the feeling sometimes, but then again, this is no option because we need more journalists to do that. So what do you think, how can we balance that out, or how can we protect journalists who are outspoken and protect their mental health?
Oh my God! You know,
I know it's a little bit of a long question.
It's at the end of the day, it becomes, I think, it is a personal decision, which, however, is not an individual decision. What I mean with that is that a whole society is behind that. I'm not a journalist per se, although I have been in my life, in previous lives, and still I also received. I received stuff because I dare to speak in English in a country that's has German as an official language. I got a nice typewriter letter about this, anonymous, of course, and some other comments, and also the other things that you get. And I think this is not something that an individual can solve by themselves. I think that what we need, personally, from what I've seen and discussed and researched, and and also what I've seen my art students, for example, and the colleagues, what one needs to do is to understand that it takes a village to raise a child, they say. So it does take a village to make sure that this village, that means the press councils, the regulator, the media houses, the job has to start, I think, at this point, very, very, very urgently and intensively within the media houses, the media organizations. And here, public service media, for example, could offer some avenues of good practice. Again, as a matter of standards, we need a lot of sensitization among male colleagues, among chief editors, among those who have positions of power, and sensitization that they do not trivialize. This is an old, a centuries old story, to trivialize the voice of women and social groups that are considered not belonging in the normality of newsmaking or media content, or even more public sphere, right out there. We see how women politicians get attacked and comments and all that. So as soon as women in particular become visible and they dare to tackle issues that are important, considered important, so they do not tackle the lipstick of the season, for example, which can also be very important, by the way. But but they tackle issues like refugees, policy, public policy, politics, and so on. They are considered as trespassers, and this is a mentality. Now, in our study, we found that women journalists here in Austria almost know where these haters, so to speak, come from. They mostly come from the right-wing, very right-wing spectrum of politics. Also, importantly, they are educated and of a very good socioeconomic standards. So, the old argument that, oh, when people get educated or people are not poor, then they don't have stupid ideas, doesn't stand. The final thing, which I think is very, very important in terms of regulation and policy, is that these attacks, when they take place, two things about this. When these attacks take place, they all seem to be follow a model. So they try to keep you in a conversation and a reaction pattern all the time, which is where the mental health issue comes into. And the other thing is that when women try to report these things to first responders, which would be the police, for example, they are pushed back, sometimes re-victimized, because this is also violence, right? We have to name it for what it is. And sometimes totally ignored, and sometimes because the police itself does not feel they have any authority, jurisdiction to do anything. So what can be done was your question, and my answer would be that it is a multiple level. We need the short-term aims, which is immediate action with media houses, media organizations. And then there's a meso-term and long-term, which has to do with awareness and conscious raising and media literacy at schools and so on. Yeah. And changes in institutions such as the police, for example. But this is very much connected to the issue of violence against women. It's a continuum, you see, it's a continuum. And Muriel said it very, 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 I have a question for Muriel.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
Go ahead, ask your question to Muriel.
Oh, can I? Oh, thank you. So Muriel, thank you so much for that. So glad to see what you guys achieved. The Istanbul Convention seems to have really been a catalyst in so many countries. I was honored to be invited to draft a monitoring handbook for a regulator of a small country, European country, which we just finished a couple of months ago. And of course, these are the kinds of things that you take. You take what should you do as a reporter and journalist and media organization properly, yeah, right? And then the regulator wanted to be able to say, hey, we are all agreed here that you're going to do this and you didn't, and instead you did this. Is there something similar in Belgium? Is there any form of any regulator, is the press council, that is there any discussion, any debate where you want to now monitor whether the good practice takes place or not?
Yeah. We have several associations that are very active in the field. That's why we took this this recommendation too. It was to put ethics in its place and not to let other institution or politics and so on to take ethics in our place. So we had to do this, we have done this, but it doesn't it doesn't, we don't we don't say to others, don't do this. And the more active, I would say that the more active party in the field of this kind of action is the Association of Journalists in Belgium, that in French-speaking part, which is working at the moment on a practical guideline to journalists. So it is based on practices, it is based on our recommendation, and it will be released in I think it's in 1 week or 2. I think it's about to be published, and there will be workshops in newsrooms, and maybe it's think that we can be invited to help them to focus on specific ethical standards in the field, and our recommendation. So our recommendation will be in this practical handbook, and yes, it's a big thing to do so. But what we wanted to do was to reassure the journalists and the media about what was about ethical rules and what was not, because you know, the first recommendations, and they were very good, but they were received as feminist. And yes, because the terms were feminist. It was coming from a women's organization too, so it was received as feminist in a way, and it was received also by journalists and by editor-in-chief just a way to tell them how they have to work, and they don't want to hear about it. So the idea was to recall, okay, you have the freedom of choices, freedom of editorial choices, but whatever the choices, you have to follow the standards, and that's what we have done. And yes, I think it's a thing that has been accepted by all the journalists and the media. And I have to say that it wasn't so easy that it can appear when I presented. It has been a lot of discussion in the council, and every word and every sentence has been thinking about to avoid to be interpreted in the wrong way and in another way than that the one it was meant by doing this.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. How did you present it to the journalists? Did you go to the newspaper and have workshops?
No, we released the recommendation. We send it. We have we have a newsletter to journalists. We have also we have released the information for all the media, just usual release, press release, and we have also specific periodical which has been sent to all journalists, and we make the publicity like this. All our decision, all our recommendation, all our public statement are released in that way. So we send it to the journalists and newsrooms, and of course we have insisted about it, and we propose all the newsroom to come and to have workshop on this topic or on others with them. So it's the usual work for us.
Thank you very much. So do you have a question for Amra or?
Yeah, I've got one because in the previous life, I was working for the regulatory body in Belgium, and we had a plan for diversity in the media. And I wonder, when I was listening to you, I wonder if there was any public program or public action to promote diversity in the newsroom in Austria, and so, and if not, and if yes, whatever the answer, I have another question and it is, if you had something to put on the table to enter in action in this field specifically, what would be your first idea, your first action to be done in all the newsrooms?
So, like, you mean an initiative about diversity in newsrooms. I haven't seen anything like that in my when I moved to Vienna and I studied here. I haven't noticed anything in that direction. So, and until now, I noticed now that there are smaller outlets, media outlets, that are made where the editor-in-chief is a migrant and or have different backgrounds, and where there are media outlets specifically for different groups of people, but like an initiative, or I haven't seen anything like that. So I wish that somebody would have told me 10 years ago, it is good that you have a different background because you have a different point of view. And this is, but back then, in my opinion, newsrooms weren't that diverse in Austria like that much. So if you had maybe 1-2 people working in a newsroom with different backgrounds, the rest was born in Austria. So there was another question. And I did work at a magazine that is based in Vienna. It's called Biber. And this is a magazine from migrants to migrants. So this is where I started writing actually. And from there I got different internships and then came to heute. So that is still existing, Biber, and there are similar outlets, media outlets now like that, from immigrants, for immigrants. I think it is very important, I think, but what we should do is not make more magazines or media outlets from migrants to migrants. We should get people with different backgrounds, migrants, into bigger newsrooms, into TV stations, into magazines, into daily newspapers, on the radio, and so that we don't have to talk about it anymore, and it should be a normal thing. And I also think that people like myself shouldn't always be referred to topics just about migration or diversity or anything in that field. We should we should have it. We should. I know it's important right now because we have so many, so little people in the newsrooms with different backgrounds. But it would be great to get there where everyone can report on every topic and different fields, and not just about be an expert because he or she or they have a background, a different background, or because they are migrant, or because they are people of color or a woman. I know we are far away from that, but to me, it is important to, when we hire new people, or that we look really how diverse is the newsroom, and we are very good at that, and that there are enough women and men, because as I said, the bigger the field, the more readers you get, because you cover all the different topics. So yeah, and maybe we should start in schools already, as Katharine said. That would be great. Have to educate the children already on those subjects, already on media, especially with social media. It would be very important, I think, and to show them that they can work in a newsroom, or to show them how to get to internships, or so they can change the media landscape also through that. So I think we should really start in schools, and then on universities, especially too, with different programs. Maybe that would be my approach. Or so this great round of people and talking about it, just and having these panels, yeah, that is also a great way to do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did you have an additional question, Muriel, for example, to
No, I was
Katharina?
wondering maybe if Katharina can answer it, but is the background of students in journalism diverse for the moment? So are they coming for different background, or is it the same that in the newsrooms? That's the question. It's the first step.
It's a very good question. In Vienna, I found that in the student body is quite homogeneous. The only diversity, or the only main diversity, really is German students versus Austrian students. That doesn't make it very diverse. But besides this, there is, of course, a good number of people who want to study, but publicistic, which is public communication, in our countries here is still seen a very elite profession where you cannot have an accent, your Sprache, your language has to be perfect, and so on and so forth. And language, as everybody knows, is one more tool to discriminate against, right? So there are so many, there's a huge body of research and study about this. And when Amra was talking, I was thinking it's precisely because these different backgrounds, different to whom, backgrounds, are considered exotic or outsiders. This is the reason why we have so many problems. If we had the opportunity through real, let me be metaphysical almost, self-reflection, to make a decision that we would very consciously tackle this assumption that people that have different voices, faces, and so on and so forth are different, and say we belong to a society that has all these differences inside it, and therefore see all people as possible newsmakers and reporters, then a lot of that weight will go, I think, will reside. A practical idea would be, a fun idea, if you like, for the press councils, might be that they pair up with a university or a higher education institution and say, okay, look, we are not just making codes of ethics as we understand them now, okay? We are looking into the future. What kind of media landscape do we want? What kind of press do we want to be the council of, right? We want to be the council of that kind of press. Okay, what does this look like if we take 10, 20 young people, usually young people, from schools, universities, whose practice is forming now, and it is formed right according to all these very difficult but sensitive topics: how to report on violence against women, how to report migration, how to report on presumption of innocence, and so on and so forth, and offer an exchange of traineeship, but on the basis of withholding the best of the best ethical standards. Again, as a matter of freedom of expression. Freedom of expression, there's a nice discussion in the chat. Yes, freedom of expression is unlimited to the limit that the freedom of expression of someone else is restricted, right? Once you start silencing someone, then it's not freedom of expression anymore. So, and that would be a fun way, practical fun way for the press councils. I think, I don't know to what extent it's a little bit dangerous maybe if they exceed their jurisdiction or whatever, but it might be seen also as an initiative that is alive, that the press council have teeth, but in a different way. That the press councils have a really important role to play, not just set standards and make everybody upset, but be creative. I don't know, this is my naive, if you like, idea, because you were asking, Amra, what would be your first thing to do? And I was thinking, can I answer? And of course, I think
yeah, that is a great idea. I really think that is a great idea. And I think
we should go to schools. I think we should go to kids. I want to tell something to the panel here. I'm sure you know that, but we've been doing research on kids and the news for 2-3 years now. The kids don't go to any news that you think of. Yeah, we know that the kids they start from 7 and 8 years old, and they don't want to go to news because they have specific answers about that. Also, the kids have specific answers about what the news should look like. But this is the matter of another panel in another conference. But we should go there, I think.
Thank you. It's a good idea.
Yeah,
So
it is.
it's already 16:30. I think it's time to open for questions of the audience.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Katharine, raised his hand.
yeah, Peter Finney.
Thank you, Chair. The main, well, I can't say the main, but one of the major problems faced by women journalists in Ireland is the level of abuse and threats they receive on social media. It's quite extraordinary to compare the relatively neutral commentary you get about male journalists. But when it comes to women journalists, there is a level of aggression and anger and threats at times. It's very difficult to deal with that because it feels like an invasion of one's privacy, because in some ways your Facebook page or Twitter page comes into your home in a very personal way. And certainly I've spoken to women journalists who feel threatened simply by the largely anonymous people who post material about them, which is just very aggressive. And in many ways, this is a disincentive towards women journalists dealing with so-called women's issues, because that's what generates the most aggression from presumably male social media users.
So, who wants to give an answer or comment?
I think this is the same observation. It's applying in all countries. I think it's applying in Belgium, in the French-speaking part of Belgium, where the Association of Journalists again is conducting or has conducted a survey on it. So yes, so they are very active on it too, but there has been a lot of complaints to court against person who were arresting journalists, women journalists. So yes, it's an issue that has to be tackled, but not by the Press Council. I think it's not in our capacity, but we have to be aware of it. And 2 days ago, we have released a decision, a ruling about a case. The complaint of a journalist against a report where it was identified, and the report was about sexism in journalism, and the journalist was mentioned because in the report because he had arrested several women, several colleagues in their work. So yes, it was a big deal. It's a big decision, but we have said the report was correct. The journalist could be identified, and he has done it in the framework of his work. So it was a public position and public post he had made about the women. So he is responsible, and the report was correct, and he had the right of a reply and so on. So it was okay. But we see it in our in the reports and the complaints we receive.
If I may add, I don't know if, may I, Chair?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Please.
I think it's important in these cases that the media organizations do stand behind these journalists, that they become public, that they denounce this kind of behavior. The Twitter account, you're absolutely right. The Twitter and Facebook is coming into your home, and people want to protect their children, for example, their families, their private life, and they don't want this stuff. However, at the same time, this is very public, and the one thing, the least that media organizations can do is to stand behind in a public manner. Maybe what the press councils can do is issue encouragement, I don't know your jargon at this point, encouragement guidelines that whenever possible, this should be done. Because what happens is, the problem is that although these voices are not the majority in society, they are the loudest. And when we remain silent, then they only occupy much more public space. And I think this is now the struggle to reduce this public space they occupy.
Are there any recommendations in any country about this issue?
I could add something. I think there are two aspects of discrimination. One aspect is discrimination within the news content, and there is a clear responsibility for the press councils. We are constantly making decisions on discrimination of different societal groups in the news coverage. And then there is a second aspect, discrimination within the editorial department or the news outlet. And for this, the responsibility of the press councils is not that clear. I mean, we make discussions, conferences, and we raise that topic, but according to our procedures, we don't have a clear responsibility. Yeah, so we have to differentiate a little bit about that, but that doesn't mean that we don't step in for the second problem. Yeah, but I just wanted to see, for the first aspect, there is a clear responsibility and a clear duty, and the second aspect is not that clear.
Thank you, Alex.
We are only dealing with content, of course, of course.
Are there some other questions?
Yeah, Manfred Brotzer.
There's a question by Manfred Brotzer.
Sorry, yeah. Manfred, you have the floor.
Sorry, now I'm here. This is not a question, it's a kind of a report. In our experience, we have in recent years increasing number of complaints connected to the so-called LGBTQ+. And I will not ignore that we all have the journalists and the press council have a big problem, because big number of these complaints the allegation that journalists do not identify clearly the connection to a so-called victim to one of these different groups. That means there is a queer or another member of one of these minorities. The journalist reports and he make a mistake because he is not used to identify the correct determination, the self-determination. So there are a lot of conflicts, and we have big problems to get to decisions, because our impression is we are in midst a cultural development and a cultural process, and all actors have, with goodwill, a lot of problems to come always on the level of the recent interpretation and the recent level of protection. So this is just a spotlight into the presentation of this problem and education of a press council.
Thank you very much, Manfred. What about other press councils? Do they have similar problems with such kind of cases?
Yeah, can I say there, yes, we have had recently a couple of very difficult complaints about transgender issues, and it's such an exceptionally sensitive subject. And even with the best will in the world, it's very hard to navigate the right language to use. And you're dealing with people who are very vulnerable and people who are very wounded in many ways. And it's actually quite difficult to even give advice to journalists on how to handle it, because I'm not sure that transgender community itself has come up with language and terminology which is acceptable to all the people. So it's really difficult for journalists to report on these issues. And however well-meaning you are, it's very easy to upset some people.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That is true.
Yeah,
if I may cut in.
Yeah, please.
I have been dealing with some of these issues myself. I have reported on transgender topics and issues in the past. And what I found out, or what worked for me, is research is really key. And I cannot speak for all of the different groups. If you have a story that you do with one transgender person, it is just that one person. And I try to get that input from that person and also talk to organizations, different organizations. There's where the research also comes from, and they help a lot with the wording, or and what I also do is ask of course the person that I'm doing the story with what he or she is comfortable with in the language. And because as a journalist you cannot know everything, of course, all the minority groups or all the LGBT+Q, all the different backgrounds. So what I find important is to get advice from organizations that are specialized in these topics, talk to experts, get different different opinions, not just from maybe one organization, get more insight, because the more people you talk to, the more insight you have. And always recheck with the person you're talking about, or the story you're telling, you know, the person you are interviewing about, because it's their story and it's what they want to read in the newspaper. It's about themselves. So that is very important, I think. But it is a very difficult topic, but the more experts you get in, the better, I think. That worked for me.
Thank you, Amra, for this
If I may say something about it, just we received also complaints from a transgender association, and in parallel with the complaint, they have asked us to build to write a lexicon for using the right words intended to journalists, because we have done so for topics related to migrants and to foreigners. So we have a recommendation for migrants and foreigners and related matters to foreigners, and they asked us to do the same, and we have said no, there is no need for it, but we have taken the time because it was necessary to discuss with the association, with the members of the association, to explain them how a journalist is working, because there is a lot of representation in the mind of the members of such association. they don't understand how journalists are working. So we have taken the time to explain it, and they have asked a lot of questions. And after that, and after the complaint, we do not have other problems. And I think most of the time, and it's a general reflection on the general public, there's a great misunderstanding about how journalists are working. And if we are not explaining that, we will receive a lot of complaints that are not, that we cannot deal with, because it doesn't concern ethics, it concerns only rights of journalists and not duties of journalists.
Thank you very much. Now we have Luis Paulich and then Ruth Rodriguez, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, relating to the LGBT topic, we had a case this year at the Austrian Press Council where there was an interview with a famous singer from Austria who is non-binary. It's called Kerosene 95. And it was an interview, and this was a very direct interview. The journalist asked the singer questions like, is it necessary to make these demands to the majority of people? And we got a lot of complaints. I think it was one of the biggest cases this year. A lot of people from the LGBT community came to us. And we discussed this in the Senate, but in the end, the Senate said it's part of the freedom of press to provoke questions during an interview. And they also said, like, there is some thing going on at the moment at universities that lecturers say they are afraid to talk about people. So that's why in the end, the Senate said we must, the press freedom must be interpreted widely. Yeah, and the media talked a lot about it.
Thank you, Luis. Ruth Rodriguez. Yeah, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much for this interesting session. I would like to mention that in our case in the Catalan Press Council, I must say that the recommendations are still very general. For instance, they refer to the coverage of immigrants, issues related to sexual orientations, and also religions, but I must say that they are still very general. And I think in some aspects, some recommendations should be revised in order to be more specific and just to be able to face the challenges that we are dealing with in our reality. And I think in that case, I think I must say that perhaps there are some actors, different actors that must be involved, in the sense that, for instance, when we are talking about language and that idea and necessity of being inclusive, perhaps we need other actors to support the media changing the idea on how people have to be treated, etc. And also, for instance, that idea of visibility, in the sense that, for instance, the situation of women during the COVID and the lockdowns, how the different groups have suffered the consequences of pandemia in different levels and in different ways. And I think that has to deal with the idea of power, in the sense that, for instance, I see two different discourses. For instance, when I am at the university, teaching at the university with young people, and they are just speaking in a very different language, in the sense that they accept and they deal with these kind of issues in a very free way and with a different mentality than you see in media, where they play a different role and their position is less dominant than in other sectors. And for instance, I must say that in Spain and in the Catalan context, we have seen how people, for instance, women and young people, have created different platforms, for instance, podcasts, to cover some issues that are not covered at all in the traditional media because they don't have a space, or for instance, they don't want to be like the women in the conference. They want to be just the main characters in the conversations. So I still see different discourses depending on the different contexts. And I think in that case, that has a clear effect on how the press councils are acting, because we are mainly just paying attention to media, and media are still in a certain way dominated by some power groups and some type of discourses that are still old, I must say, and not really connected to new generations and new issues and new ways to see the things. And when they accept to play the game, sometimes they adopt that tokenist approach that is like, okay, let's make like if we are, let's fake it to look like we are interested, but they are actually just paying the price to be like, okay, modern, and like to be, okay, we have to do this because we want to still be interested for our audiences and sell our information. So I think it's important just to really revise the things that media are doing, or how to be more inclusive for real, and just to be more diverse, as you were saying, accepting new profiles in newsrooms and things like that, because I think there is a lot of work to do. But I must say that I'm very happy in the sense that, for instance, when I compare the way my students react to these topics, and I compare the way they were reacting 5 or 6 years ago, it's amazing. They have changed so much. Now there are some obvious issues that you don't need to even explain or to put in question, because they are already accepted and nobody's gonna make fun of that. And that is great. So I think we are on the good track, but there are still a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for your comment. So we have here another comment from Daphne, that you say also had a case in the Dutch Press Council. Daphne, do you want to say a word? No.
I just wanted, I thought that's, yeah. I just wanted, sorry, I had my head. So I just wanted to say that Ruth raised something very important when it comes to the what society might be out there, what the future looks like, and where the media stand, and by consequence also where the press councils are, and which is there are points of disconnect with society. And I think the way to not let this disconnect grow is to really connect with these institutions more, like academia, like these associations, as it's already happening, but perhaps in a more programmatic way, in a more intensive and kind of 5-year plan way, because then this resolves a lot of these dilemmas and ways of how to answer, you know, the question and the complaint that was put in front of the Austrian Press Council, or the ones, for example, at the, say, Irish Press Council. So this is my argument for more cooperation among these societies, among these institutions that deal with different segments of society, and especially the future, the youth, because some things over there are resolved already, as Ruth said.
Yeah, thank you. I think what Muriel said before, it's very important to talk to all this group and to explain also how journalists work. So we have still 7-8 minutes left. Amra, Muriel, do you make a last comment, or is there any other question? Don't think so. Amra?
Here I am again. No, I totally agree with what Katharine said. I think if the councils connect more, that would be also very helpful for journalists, not only in Austria, but outside of Austria too. And maybe so they can, they have somewhere to go to get those answers about topics like the LGBTQ+ or transgender, or and what I think is also important is that we look into schools, look into the topics and issues of younger people, because more and more media outlets are disconnected to the younger generation because they only get their information from social media a lot of times, and newer news outlets that are created more recently are only online or so on social media. So the classic newspaper that you have in your hands is something that's far away for younger generations. And I think we have to reconnect there again. And that is also a challenge for journalists like myself, because I'm one of the younger ones. I turned 31, but I still don't, trying to see what are the issues for young people that are now in school and that they face with the pandemic and homeschooling, and talk to parents and the children and young students that are at home now studying because of the pandemic, and how is their job situation, what is, these are all topics. If we don't report on those, we won't get, I think, that is important, and it is not only to get the numbers up or something for the outlet, but I think that we cannot not see those topics just because we are not in their group or not at the same age. So I think we have to look more into the younger generation, especially now with mental health and the pandemic. That is something that I am trying to do more now. So yeah, and I think the councils, if we connect some dots and are more connected, I think that can help too. We can profit from that too.
So thank you. Muriel, do you have a last comment for this panel?
Yes, last word. Just, I was wondering that a few years ago we wouldn't have talked about this issue at all, because it wasn't in the media agenda, and so it was not that we weren't aware of it. It was that yes, it was a thing like another, and now it is became an important issue, and it's the fact that we are talking about it now is that it's a consequence of the fact that the press councils are part of the society. So we are not a stranger in the society. We are part of it. We are part of the journalistic world. We are part of the society, and so it's why we are talking about it. And the different stages I have shown that have conducted us to adopt this recommendation is part of this. We are part of the society, and so yes, we are following the needs, and we give hand to journalists to help them to report on this issue, and it's a way to connect. It's not the whole way to connect. We have more work to do about it, but yes, it's a beginning. I think it's a beginning.
Thank you very much, Muriel. It's a very good last comment, and we had some similar questions about this transgender articles or requests in Switzerland. But for me, it's also a question how diverse are the press councils. For example, we have 3 languages in the press council, but we don't have, I think we don't have any migrants in the press council. And it's like you said, Muriel, before, it's a beginning. We start to realize that we also have to be diverse in the press councils. So thank you very much for this panel. I learned a lot, and I take many inputs back to Switzerland in our discussion. Thank you very much. So
yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you also, Susan, that you did the moderation.